Hello and welcome to NIQ's first podcast in the series looking at the e-commerce trends around the globe. My name is Vaughan Ryan. I look after the e-commerce business across Asia Pacific, and I'm joined by four of my colleagues that are probably the most knowledgeable people in the online retail business around the world. Roberto, who looks after our European e-commerce business, Praful, who looks after our India e-commerce business, Cindy, who looks after our China business, and Didham, who's been a long-time colleague of mine, who looks after Turkey, Middle East, and Africa. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Big pleasure to be together.
Hey, recently I've been reading a fair bit about how digital companies, technology companies are struggling right now. But clearly, when I look at a lot of the NIQ data that we see, it doesn't indicate that from an e-commerce perspective. You know, Cindy, China is one of these markets that we know is flying at the moment when it comes to e-commerce, and it's changing all the time and it's so dynamic. I look at something like TikTok and I see how that's taken such a large share of the market. Can you tell us a little bit about the social commerce element that's really thriving in China at the moment?
Yes, definitely. Social commerce like TikTok is really booming in China now. We see the trend as will continue. Actually, like 2 years ago, TikTok, has no sales almost, very, very little. But can you imagine, in the 2022, it's almost like 20% of the overall FMCG. In certain categories, it's even past the mainstream e-commerce. So it's growing very, very fast. Yeah.
That's super interesting. I think one of the areas that I look at a fair bit when I consider where I'm at in parts of Asia is how different levers are being used by manufacturers to try and drive consumers. And typically we see it being driven by price. I know we've got Didham on the call as well today. And Didham, on this podcast, I know you're an analytics expert. And price is clearly one of the major reasons why shoppers shop online. Tell us a bit about what you're seeing in the online area, specifically around price.
Yes, actually, price is one of the key factors for all shoppers and consumers, right? To have the preference for online shopping. And I would like to mention that especially, right, we are seeing that China, South Korea are leading the way in terms of the FMCG online share with more than 30%. Whereas when we look at it to our region, and especially Turkey leading the way with 5.7% of share in the e-commerce. So FMCG e-commerce weight is 5.7 for total Turkey. But we are seeing especially the differences in the different categories, right? We are seeing that especially baby care, around 20% of online share in Turkey, whereas the personal care is around 15% and home care around 12%. So there are still some categories which are boosting, which we are seeing especially in the post-pandemic period, like on the beverages, hot beverages, especially coffee and tea. So it's a rising trend for all of our countries. It's really differentiating from category to category. And as you mentioned, pricing is one of the key factors, which is also for the clear consumer preference for shopping in online.
Thanks, Did. And before I move to the gents, I've got another question for Cindy, because we sort of jump from social commerce across to price, and we're always talking about causal aspects that affect sales, right?
Yeah.
I think in China, specifically when I look at the Southeast Asian market, events like double days are still super powerful. You talk a bit about social commerce, but I'm assuming double days is still a critical component to get right for manufacturers in China?
Yeah. Double day is still very critical, especially for the mainstream, e-commerce, such as Tmall. Like last year, even though it slowed down a little bit, but still the major platform to, boost traffic through the year. Yeah. Especially, go ahead.
No, keep going.
Yeah. But one more thing I also want to point out, again about social commerce, certain categories like personal care and beverage in Chinese New Year actually has been really doing very well in TikTok. Give you some very fresh number we got this week. If without TikTok, the January and February sales together is around like FMCG is down a little bit, like like a 12%. But with TikTok, it's almost flat. So you can imagine, like even
Wow.
like in beverage and also in personal care, if without TikTok, the e-commerce actually is declining. But with TikTok, actually it's increasing a lot. So you can imagine the powerful of social commerce. It's not like the planned trips. It's more like stimulating consumers, to get more sales, like from those live stream. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think as I move across to Europe a little bit, Roberto, I'm sure you're starting to see some of these elements in terms of influencers and the ability of some of this social media. But at the same time, bricks and mortar are fighting back, right? And we hear a lot of stories about clicks and pics. Is that still a trend in Europe, and what specific markets are driving that?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of different things that happening in Western Europe. So where to start? But
Yeah,
let's take quick commerce. I think a lot of you have seen the rapid growth of that specific channel, especially if you look at the big cities. There's a clear consumer demand. So if you look at the number of orders that are basically quick commerce deliverables, it's actually quite massive. At the same time, we see that a lot of countries are now changing regulations related to the dark store. So I'm personally very curious to see how that will evolve in the upcoming months, as that of course can hamper a bit of the expansion and growth of that specific business model. Another thing which I'm personally very interested in, and it's also building on what Cindy just explained about social commerce, is that we now also see that coming up in Europe, and we have the first markets where we actually are measuring that. And I was personally quite surprised, despite the fact that it's relatively new. Actually, if you look at the size of that channel, it's actually exceeding some of the quick commerce players. And I can echo that similar like in what we see in Asia, that personal care, home care are key categories. Actually, you also see that food and pet are some of the key contributors in terms of where they gain their sales from. And even if you look at the top 20 brands, it's not only dominated by personal care, but we also see, for instance, chocolate brands there. We see pet food brands. So it's an interesting area for a lot of companies to at least investigate and look at if it can also be a growth channel for them.
Oh, it's super interesting. And I don't think any of us could argue when it comes to world logistics, India is the historical winner of this forever and a day, right? So, Praful, I've been watching with a lot of interest about groups like GeoMart and how they've got in using different applications like WhatsApp. Is quick commerce still flying in India?
Oh yeah, I mean that's the buzzword at the moment. Quick commerce, everybody is riding that bandwagon. And in India, as the other developed markets in Europe, the trend is catching on. But the point that you mentioned is very relevant because now some of the bigger retail powerhouses like GeoMart have decided to leverage technology in the social media space. So WhatsApp is one of the biggest social media platform in India, and a lot of Indians now have smartphones. The best thing that could have happened is WhatsApp tying up hands with GeoMart and launching an app that allow you to place orders on your WhatsApp chat group. So that's such an amazing thing. So it's the most revolutionary concept that has taken WhatsApp by surprise.
I see with a fair bit of interest when I look at the Southeast Asia market specifically, how retailers are coming and going relatively quick. It's very dynamic in which retailer is going to exist, and they seem to be hot for short periods of time. And I know from my experience looking after Korea and other markets, some of the brands are starting, or the retailers are starting to get bigger and bigger over time and more solidified. But Cindy, in China, we're not seeing that. We're seeing movement all the time of who the core retailer is. We've seen Alibaba own the e-com space for a short period of time. JD are still there at the moment owning some. PDD are starting to get bigger, but in certain sectors like fresh. And now we talk about social commerce with TikTok. How do manufacturers deal with this? This seems like such a challenge of where to place their bets, where to put their money. It's such a challenging time, right? How do you advise clients which retailer to focus on?
Yes, actually, it's a hard topic. I don't think we should like advise our manufacturers to focus on certain particular like platforms or retailers. It's really we need to we advise our manufacturers to really need to catch the trend. The booming trend, as you talk about, is a social commerce, but also another thing is a quick commerce. It's similar to, like India or Europe. Actually, quick commerce here, we call it like O2O, online to offline, So actually, we still see this trend will continue. And now, even though it's maybe still a little bit small in China, it's like 3% of the overall, MT sales. But in certain categories, we see also a faster growing trend, like even in beverage or in some like snacks, people are willing to pay the premium for their time to get the convenience. So in other words, advice is really to ride with the trends. It's always easier to against trend.
Yeah, it's dangerous to get in, dangerous to be dark at the moment when it comes to this, because it's such a volatile industry, such a volatile channel, right? You told me an interesting statistic on pasta that blew me away. I don't know if you remember telling me this, but I'm not going to quote exactly what it is, but TikTok sales of pasta, is it right saying like can you remember the statistic that you talked about the other week? I think you said it was 30% or 40% of sales now are on pasta. Online are occurring.
I did tell you a long time ago. I don't quote right away, but in lots of categories, TikTok is about 30, 40, or certain categories even higher, than the overall, other e-commerce platforms.
It's
a bit. It is the phenomenon.
It's a bit of a leading question, because one of the challenges I think a lot of our manufacturers and retailers face right now is that they don't know what they don't know, and they're making assumptions about categories that potentially are not big in their mind in the online world. But we know that certain categories, I'll give you an example, in alcohol in Singapore, over 50% of off-premise sales occur online. That's over half of the sales occurring online. Didem, I know that you're starting to see certain trends where categories we'd never considered in the past are starting to dominate in the online area. Have you got some live examples from the Middle East and Africa?
I would like to especially highlight that especially food categories are rising significantly right after the pandemic period. And we are seeing that confectionery beverages are also increasing, but still there is a long way to go. I mean, when I look to online versus offline growth across our countries in overall for FMCG, right? In Turkey, for example, it's with the inflation environment, 100% both for both segments, right? Online, offline. There is a growth, a similar growth in online and offline. When we look to Saudi Arabia, offline growth was 6%, whereas the online grew by 55%, right? And when we look to UAE, offline growth was 9% and online growth was 63%. So we are seeing nowadays, especially across our Middle East and Turkey countries, that e-commerce is rising significantly. And as you mentioned, it differs from category to category, but the leading categories I would like to mention would be definitely the baby care, personal care, home care, which is then followed up by the other surprising categories, of course, right? I think it's so important to understand that we are now coming to an era of omni-channel shopping experience, right, Von?
You stole my thunder, Didem, because my next question was going to be for Roberto, because I know in Europe we've just launched an Omni solution, and we're talking a lot about Omni at the moment. I know there's a statistic in Asia that suggests that over half of the consumers, when they're in a bricks and mortar store, now have an application open, or maybe multiple applications of online. So they're comparing prices all the time. Roberto, you've got some Omni data. What are you seeing in the Omni world? Is it similar trends in Western Europe?
Yeah, for sure. Consumers are very price conscious, and I think it's also, of course, driven by the inflation that we see across the globe, right? So a lot of consumers are restricted in terms of their budget. At the same time, I think if we look at e-commerce specifically, it shows still a massive growth. So we're still in the double digits. So it's a healthy channel. At the same time, also, of course, brick and mortar is still progressing well. So it's not that that there is a complete shift, but both are actually doing quite well. But I think for a lot of consumers, e-commerce is actually a way also to for those conscious consumers, a way to potentially save money, or at least have clarity that after they check out, they exactly know this is what I'm spending. Where of course, if you go into a store and you start putting things in your shopping baskets, it can always be a surprise. So it's also a way that some consumers are using e-commerce for deal seeking, or actually to have more budget control.
So you see the offline and online worlds merging all the time, right? It's not necessarily one or the other, it's one and the other, correct?
Yeah, but I think maybe a bit of a controversial statement here is that if you actually look at the fastest growing brands or the retailers, it's not always an omni player. And that's something a lot of retailers and manufacturers were caught off guard from that. Because once we started to show the data, they suddenly see that players that sometimes don't even play in the brick and mortar space can be top 3 players, or even sometimes market leaders in terms of their size. So it's something, you can't just focus on one or the other. You need to have that holistic view to understand what the consumers are buying.
Yeah, it's a great point, because I know in my markets, we've seen a lot of brands that just appear in the online world that don't appear in the offline. The cost of distribution that used to exist in the traditional world is far cheaper in the online world, at least in the short term, right, to get a listing. This whole component of these marketplace or apps allow for those listings a lot faster. So the danger in not knowing your true competitor set, you could be making observations or assumptions based on offline only data to say categories are flat or in decline, when potentially there's certain brands that you're not aware of that are stealing share, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of these digital first brands are really growing big time.
Yeah.
I mean, there are multiple examples that have started digital and then also kind of gone offline as well. So I think that's a great platform really for some of these brands to showcase their innovation, and that's what brings the value to e-com.
Yeah, I agree, Praful. And I know one of the dangers in India, when you start to make assumptions that India is a small market for e-commerce, give us some stats, mate. Blow us away with some numbers around India that we're going to sit there and go, hell, we've got to get onto e-com tomorrow. Our clients do.
Oh yeah, I mean, $45 billion was the e-commerce business back in 2021. This year, 2022, it was $75 billion. So it's big and it is growing. It's not small anymore, and it is getting into the fabric of the Indian consumption story. So I think it over a period of time, with such a big country, and we are young, we like to look good, we like to talk around, we like to show off. So it's just going to be all these categories around personal care. The point that did mention, some of these brands are really going to be big in India, and just watch out for us. We are here in from the e-commerce space.
Yeah, and I think this is a good time to go back to, let's talk about the big 2 markets in the world. We know the US is big, but the biggest market in the world, or the biggest for sales, is China. And if we look at China and Korea, they seem to be the market leaders in terms of share of FMCG, which is all of our expertise. Cindy, the evolution within China of e-commerce, I've heard a few people tell me recently that it's flattening out in China. But the statistics you mentioned earlier don't sort of say that when you hear what groups like TikTok are doing. Where is e-com at in China? Give us some stats that, look, China always blows us away with numbers, but give us some growth numbers and what's happening in certain categories and why it's so important.
Yes, if you talk about the e-commerce overall growth, it's not very very promising at this stage, especially like in the past 3 years we experienced significant like a COVID, etc. We have lots of logistic challenges, but I think it's started to become pick it up. Giving you some statistic, I just got, as I said, the January and February data, so I can share with you that, for example, if you talk about total FMCG, it is about, actually, I don't want this number to disappoint you. Actually, it's 12% down with Jingdong and Ali, but with TikTok, is almost flat. It's like a minus 1.3. But for like personal care categories, you can see that without TikTok, it's about minus 11%, but with TikTok, it's about 3%. Growth. So again, and also in different categories perform differently. We did see certain categories. We see like they started to transition from offline sales to online sales, and actually they grew very well. Like some basics like oil, edible oil, or like even formula. The online sales growth outgrow the offline, and also some staples, like rice, etc. All those things growing much faster online versus offline. Yeah. So I think when we look at the overall market, maybe it's flat, but if you look into it, there are still a bunch of categories. Actually, they are growing very well, both online and offline, and also certain categories they are growing very fast online. Yeah, you really need to look into details.
It's interesting because I know Dida made some references to some specific statistics before across her regions. I know across some of the APAC markets, we talk a lot about how much more room for growth there is. If you look at a market like Korea, which is probably the most mature of all the e-com markets, they're looking around 35% market share for FMCG is happening in the online world across all the different groups of online. So we're going from traditional e-com marketplaces, quick com, etc. If that's the ceiling, if that's where this market's going, and we consider what's going on across most markets, Didham, give us some numbers out of the Middle East about how big this could be. Give us some future, because I think in my world, I think the future of growth in retail is, if it's not all online, it's 90+% of it's going to be in the online world. What are you seeing?
Yes, thanks a lot, Von. Actually, I wanted to give as a reference point Turkey, right? We are seeing that we are almost at 5.7% total FMCG as a share in terms of the FMCG share in online, which is quite a big number, because when I compare it in terms of the Europe ranking, we are seeing especially UK, France is leading the ways, and Turkey is also a strong player in terms of from the European perspective. And of course, as I mentioned, in United Arab Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, in South Africa, of course, e-commerce is accelerating, and we are seeing also differences, especially in the different categories. I think during the entire journey, it's so important that there is a laser focus, especially on shopper experience from both manufacturers as well as retailers' perspectives, right? Maybe if I may mention this, from a global perspective, I see that both manufacturers and retailers have some space to improve their online shopper experience further, right? And we are especially observing four important dimensions, right? One of them is availability, like especially, which was also mentioned, I think, especially by Cindy. I think availability in online is one of the key pillars, right? Second is curation. Third one is immediacy, and fourth one is excitement, right? I think curation is so important, right, for an online shopper experience. Retailers can always enhance online search process of products, aligning with search platforms, steering consumers to the right direction by suggestion, as well as on content management. And manufacturers are supposed to carefully and purposely manage their messages for their brands. And they also need to align their brand offer with most research attributes in order to optimize the brand relevance in the online area. So this is what I would like to highlight. So creation is an important shopper experience pillar during the journey of the e-commerce rise. Another one is immediacy, right? We know that shoppers would like to have it as soon as possible. And you have mentioned quick commerce is on the rise, right? Especially in some selected categories and in some specific countries. And I think immediacy is another crucial aspect of online shopping experience. To really fully explore opportunities of immediacy, retailers can, for example, create new touch points to the products where impulse moments occur online as well as physical store. So also online orders should be flexible, easy to modify, so that shoppers can make their baskets larger anytime before delivery so that they have the opportunity to maximize their basket size, right? I think last but not least, it's about excitement on the journey with the omni shopper experience and rise of e-commerce, right? I think it's for an ideal shopper experience, excitement is an important pillar, and retailers need to surprise, delight shoppers by customer services or other available means, right? They can also offer extend their offers, drive loyalty, right, through future actions. In order to create a really pleasant and long-term experience, right? And I think manufacturers should gamify the shopping process, for example, and in order to benefit from the achievement-seeking behavior of the consumers, they can really have a laser focus on this part so that the potential can increase. So actually, these 4 items I wanted to highlight: availability, creation, immediacy, and excitement for retailers and manufacturers to maximize the potential of omnichannel experience and to help and to shape their shopper marketing strategies, right? I think it's so crucial.
I think that it's a lot to take in, right? And this is what our clients are having to deal with. And if you're sitting in a traditional mindset and you're still thinking about the online or omni world in the same way you used to treat the bricks and mortar world, you're in for some tough times, right? So I know we're getting towards the end of our podcast today, but you touched upon something that there's still challenges in the online world. We talk a lot about availability, and a scary statistic I think about a lot is that in the average supermarket or hypermarket in Asia, there's somewhere between 75,000 and 90,000 items. If I jump on one of the marketplace wraps today, there's about 1.5 million items. But availability means so many different things to so many different consumers, right? Availability for some is I need it in the next hour. Availability for others, I'm happy to receive it in 2 weeks, right? And this is the challenge for all of our manufacturers and retailers. How do they cater for all this? Roberto, you live in, let's call it the old world, given that for most of us, we're all in the young world, right? You can talk about history, but in the old world, how are consumers dealing with that, and how are manufacturers dealing with availability?
Oh, it's a great question, and I think actually there's quite a shift if you talk about old world, and I'm more taking the angle from an operational point of view, where in the past, if you thought about online, so if you was doing business with a retailer, there was maybe one national site that basically catered for the whole country. That model has changed over the past year, and what we see is basically geolocation is an important aspect in terms of the experience you get as a consumer. So depending on where I live, I might get a different assortment, I might get different prices, the availability of products in terms of which products are offered, but also the out of stocks vary quite a bit. So it also means that we as a company are now helping our clients transition to that new model, because having, for instance, a sample-based approach, just measuring 1 or 2 websites from our clients, it doesn't work anymore. You really need to have that census point of view, because for some retailers, it means that within one country, they have maybe hundreds or 1,000 different versions of the truth, and you need to be able to collect all that in terms of your out of stock, but also think about consumer ratings and other aspects that basically impact your online performance. So I do see that shift is happening, and we're also upgrading in that sense how we operate here in Western Europe.
Yeah, look, today's podcast is 30 minutes. We're not going to be able to answer it all, but the great thing about this is we're all going to have a series of these over the next few months where our clients and people that want to hear more about e-com can jump on, listen in their own time, and of course, come back to us with any questions. Massive thanks to the 4 experts that I call upon all the time with some of my dodgy questions. So thanks, Roberto, Praful, Didam, and Cindy for all your expertise today. And I look forward to catching up with you very soon to share more insights on what NIQ can provide to our clients. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you
Take
very
care.
much for the people talk. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you.